we know that when a term ends with the word gate, unless it's, of course, an actual gate, it often has the connotation of trouble, of scandal, of things like this. So we're familiar, of course, with Watergate. Those of you who followed the news last summer might have heard of something called Bridgegate, which was a situation with the Christie administration in New Jersey closing down some lanes feeding into the George Washington Bridge. For those of you familiar with Fort Lee, right, leading into Manhattan, which caused huge traffic backups. And there was a whole conversation about political payback and whatnot. So that's the second gate. We've got Watergate, and we've got Bridgegate. The third gate, you might not be familiar with unless you're a football fan, and even so, you'd have to follow the AFC East. Okay, that's when, at the time, the Jets coach was a guy by the name of Eric Mangini. Didn't last very long. Was a former aide for Bill Belichick with the Patriots. And he claimed that Belichick for years had been videoing other teams' play call. And that became known as Spygate. And they got penalized with a draft pick and some other things. So that's our third gate. And then there's one more, which I'm going to leave for the moment. If you think of the four gates that Watergate, which is going to be the first one, is the most scandalous, please put a 1. 2, you'll follow along. Just curious to get your feedback. So here are our 4. So the question, of course, is of these 4 gates, which is worse? Number 1, Watergate. I know that there's no hyphen there, but I put it there just for effect. Number 2, we have Bridgegate. Closing down the George Washington Bridge, basically causing people hours of unnecessary traffic, all for political payback to the mayor of Fort Lee, who didn't align himself with the governor. At least that was the claim. Option number 3, for those of you who are football, by the way, I can't imagine Spygate doesn't have other implications besides for football. It's got to be all over the place with intelligence agencies and things like this. And number 4 is our topic, Delegate. Okay, would anyone like to share their views? Okay, remember, you're voting over here. Hands in front of you. Just scanning the room for a second. Okay, so I see a lot of 1s. I saw some 4s. Okay, not too many 2s or 3s, and that's fine. But the reason I put this here, besides for the, let's call it humor effect, is the fact that Delegate can be a scary thing for us. And I'm going to actually ask you to engage in a couple of quick think, pair, shares associated with it. For those of you not familiar, think, pair, share works as follows. You think on your own. You pair with the person sitting next to you. If there isn't somebody next to you, you may want to scoot over a couple of chairs, or you may just want to kind of like lean over a few seats and speak. And then there's share, people who volunteer to share with us the thoughts that were going on in your small group conversation. Okay? So again, think. Pair with the person next to you, or people next to you, share with the entire group. Here's question number 1. If I ask you to complete this sentence, my school has an administrative team, as opposed to a single administrator, it is because... Okay, I'll stop with that. But if you could take a moment to think about that, discuss it with your peers, and then share some feedback. I don't have a whiteboard on which to write, I'm sorry, so we're going to have to do it all orally. But it's a small group, so hopefully we'll be able to share with one another. Okay, so let's take a few seconds to do that. One of the things I say often in workshops is that the worst part of my job is to cut off great conversation. I hate doing it, but unfortunately we don't have a lot of time. Any volunteers to share how you completed that sentence? The brave amongst us? Anyone like to get started, please?
Just to share the responsibilities.
Share responsibilities. How many of you feel that? Thumbs up if you think that that's, here's by the way another great technique. Thumbs up if you think that that's something you would have said. Yeah, that came up, and thumbs down if you don't. Also a great technique. By the way, well, I didn't use the term before, but it's what we call checking for understanding. So when you want to see what your students know, what they've understood, you use a quick technique. It's quick, there's no talking. You're able to see everybody in the room. You noticed that before, right? When I surveyed, I saw the 1s and the 4s. I got everybody responding. Typically what happens is, this gentleman will respond, the rest of you will go to sleep. Okay? That's usually what happens. If I'm walking around and engaging with proximity and other factors, I might keep you more involved. But are you really invested in what he has to say? Probably not. But you're invested in what you have to say. So if I get you speaking, or at least communicating, then I'm one step ahead. Thank you very much. What else? Shared responsibility, yes?
Because we each have different strengths.
Oh, beautiful, right? We complement one another in a variety of ways. okay? And I might be really good at, you know, speaking with the students and manning the, let's call it, student conduct and comportment and all these kinds of things. I might even be great in going into classrooms and observing instruction, but I have weaknesses in certain other areas, and so I want people to compliment me. Anyone else? Okay, so I'll share a few, and let me know if any of these resonate with you. I'm sorry for the size, but it kept kind of getting smaller as I was adding ideas. Okay, so number one, I need help. And I need help might include everything from academic oversight. I need to get into classrooms. I can't be everywhere. All right, programming. I need help with who's going to arrange for, if you have an upcoming holiday or legal holiday, you have some kind of event you want to plan for. Discipline. You want to deal with communication, planning, or affirming good work that's going on in your building. All of that requires manpower. Right? I can't be writing notes all day and doing anything else. So I need others to assist me. Sometimes, I think it was mentioned before, I like company. I like people to bounce ideas off of. And sometimes we find that being in an administrative position can be one of the loneliest positions out there. It really can be, because you love your board, hopefully, but still there's certain things you can't necessarily share. You love your administrative colleagues, hopefully, but there might be some things even about them that you feel uncomfortable sharing, at least all the time. And so you don't really necessarily have a network by which, so you find other ways by which to reach out to people. Okay? We mentioned this before, unique strengths of different team members, different perspectives, and having multiple faces and voices can be healthy. If every time a message comes from the head of school, it sort of wears thin pretty fast. It gets stale. So if the head of school leaves her message for the big things, and some of the smaller things come out of the PR office, come out of the assistant head of school's office, comes out of a team, you know, a lead teacher's chair, something like this, then you've created variety. And that, of course, can be helpful as well. So, and there might be others. Anything else you wanted to add before we move forward? I think it's probably a pretty sizable list here as to why we have a team. So here's question number 2. And that question is, how would you complete this sentence? I would delegate more if I. Let's take a minute to get back into our preparings from before. Okay, think about your situation. You have things you probably want to delegate, but you don't. So the question is why? What's holding you back? Any responses here? What's holding you back from delegating more?
Fear.
Fear. Can you elaborate?
That they will not do what we
ask them to do.
Give me a product that we were expecting.
Oh, that's important. Yeah, you want X and you're going to get Y. Yeah, we have that sometimes with our kids in the kitchen, for example, also. They set out to make a certain cake or something. Next thing you know, you get something interesting in return. Anyone? Thank you very much. That was great. Anyone else?
I'll just piggyback off of that.
Please.
Same basic premise, but the smaller the margin of error, the less likelihood of feeling comfortable delegating.
Sure, sure. And part of that might just be because we feel we are the resident expert in our building. I mean, frankly, that's why we're the head of school or whatever position we occupy. We got there because we have expertise. We got there because we've demonstrated capacity in the past. The problem, of course, is that, what we said before, we can't be everywhere doing everything. And we have to be able to let go. The other concern, frankly, which we didn't talk about, just relates to our own sustainability. You know, it's a very common term today as we think about the environment and we think about, you know, global sustainability and things like this. We also have to realize we have our own professional sustainability to worry about. Burnout in this position is extremely high. And that's for a variety, it's not our topic, but one of the factors at play when we talk about burnout, when we talk about sustainability is, have I taken so much on my plate that I just don't feel like I can function? And when I hit a wall, where do I turn? Because I'm already a third of the way into the project, the deadline is now looming ever so closer than it was when I first contemplated what to do with it, and now I feel stuck with it, and I can't give it over to somebody else. Anyone else? We're still dealing with this question. For those of you who just walked in, feel free to weigh in as well, please.
In schools, a lot of us wear a lot of different hats, and it's all very busy.
Yeah.
I hate to burden somebody else
Sure.
with one more thing.
Sure. Wonderful. We're kind and considerate. You probably think of it as, I wouldn't want to be asked to do another thing, right? So if I don't want to be asked to do it, why would I want to put it on a teacher or an administrator who already is here every day from 8 to 6, you know, working around the clock, you know, emailing in the evenings, whatever they're doing to demonstrate that they never take time away, and I'm going to saddle them with another job. Excellent. Thank you so much. Anyone else? Okay, so I'm going to share with you a couple that I hear often. Some of them we've talked about, some of them are a little bit different. Tell me if any of these resonate with you. The first one is trusted my colleagues more, which I think we did discuss. And again, trust doesn't mean I don't like them, I don't feel good about them, they're not ethical people. That's not what we mean by trust. Trust to get the job done. Trust to get the job, whatever that's defined. It could be it's an issue of consistency and perseverance and these kinds of, it could be. But oftentimes it's just, do they have the expertise? Moving clockwise, I wasn't so controlling. Nobody mentioned that, but I think deep down all of us on some, look, that's just the way we were created. Right? We're created to want to own things, especially the school. It has mine. Right? People think of the school, they think of me. My name's on the stationery, my face is on the newsletter, right? There's an immediate association between institution and institutional leader. We all know that. Or people within the institutional leadership. And so I want to make sure that anything that goes out there that we're producing has my stamp of approval. Okay? If I had more time, how many of us are like this guy in the picture over here, where we're so swamped and we're so overwhelmed by our day-to-day responsibilities, I just can't think about that project and what it's going to mean for me to give it to somebody and to be involved in their process. I just can't think about it. And so when it comes, I'll deal with it, right? I have a relative who doesn't really like to delegate, and I nag this person a lot. You should be delegating more within the family. And this person often just will default into, okay, I'll just do it. Okay, and we probably have a lot of that. And finally, if I knew how. Some of us, when we mentioned scared before, we talked about being scared because we didn't know what our colleagues would do with it. But sometimes we're scared because we don't know how to do it. We don't know what good delegation looks like. And in the time that we have left, I'm going to try to really get ours moving. By the way, the handouts for this presentation, the slides are available online. I'm not exactly sure where they, I have made some changes. I made it a little bit shorter, but the basic content is the same. Okay, so you're welcome to access it there as well. Okay, so we have a few objectives. Every time you have a class, we want to list the objectives. What are we trying to accomplish today? Number one, to understand its importance. Why is delegation an important topic? Clearly, the fact that you're here indicated to you that this might be something of significance. Number two, to identify when it is or isn't appropriate. It's not appropriate for all situations. And finally, some strategies, probably the most important, number three. What are the practicalities associated with it that will help us be successful and effective in delegation? Any questions or comments before I continue? Okay. So let's jump right into it. So let's talk about some reasons as to why I would delegate. Now this might be a one-time delegation, it may be ongoing, where I'm going to, from now on, give over student discipline to so-and-so. That's going to now be her responsibility. That's a full-time. It's basically changing her job description. Okay, to now incorporate school-wide discipline as part of her responsibilities. Okay, so it might be because I have a new project. We, for example, at Tower Day School, for those of you who weren't here earlier, I was the head of school here locally in town before moving up north. My last year, we introduced what's called PBIS. You might be familiar with it. It's Positive Behaviors, Instruments, and Supports. It's a school-wide discipline program, positive-based discipline program that really focuses students on values. It's a great program on many levels. If you implement it effectively, it could be wonderful. Let's say I want to implement PBIS in my school, or I want to implement more inquiry-based learning in my school, or any type of, whatever it might be. Okay? I don't feel that I'm the right person to take it because it's just going to require too much day-to-day, oversight. I'm going to find somebody else to take this program and to run with it. Or a particular responsibility. We have a trip coming up. Who's going to make sure that all of the details associated with that trip are being managed properly? Okay? I might have strategic planning implementation to consider. right? Every 5 years, whatever your time frame might be, you've got to create that plan. Now you've got to implement that plan. You're going to take pieces out of the plan and you're going to designate them or delegate them to particular individuals within the organization. Okay? Questions, if you have any, please don't hesitate. Or if you want simply to be a great teacher. Right? You're a teacher by trade. That's how you got to your position. You want to continue to teach. You want to help people develop and grow. And so you're going to give them responsibility, not because you can't, but because you want to give them that opportunity. Especially, for example, if you have a teacher who has said to you, I really would love to add some administrative responsibility to my resume. I'd like to become an administrator down there, and then of course you caution them not to, but different conversation, and then you give them something that they can own and they can develop so that they can become the very best and really round out their professional expertise. Does this make sense? Any questions here? Okay. So first you got to figure out, well, what am I going to delegate? That's an important question. The what. And in the context of what, you often want to start with something small, because again, we have here, as our friend in the back told us, what is this person going to do with it? So if the stakes are low, the outcome and the implications are low. And as a result, I have less to worry about. If the context and the implications are significant, then I might be more fearful. You want to leave as much time as you can. Unfortunately, we often are delegating by the proverbial seat of our pants. And so that can be harder. But if we can take a big picture view, if we can sort of take a step back and have this, let's call it year-long view, maybe even go out a few years, with a strategic plan, you can do that. Who's going to really take this from beginning to end? Who can I find that's going to be the right fit? And that person is the one that I begin with slowly. Let's get our feet dipped into that water and see how that feels. Something, a little aspect of it. Right? PBIS has many components. There are the values, there's the motto and the slogan, there's getting teachers on the team, creating your PBIS team where you're going to get feedback on a regular basis. Any one of those is relatively small and not so threatening. So if you give them that, let them just start with something small. They do that well, give them the next piece. And then maybe after that, say, hey, you're doing really well here, I want you to take on the big picture. Does that make sense? You sort of bringing them along slowly, giving them a chance, realizing that mistakes might happen. And so if you lead it with enough time, you want to get this PBIS out there by December. And it's now August. Okay, so you've got 6 months or 5 months of lead time on this. That's what you want. You want to get yourself going so that it's not instantaneous with an immediate response needed where the pressure is very acute. And then you may or may not get what you want, and then you're sort of left holding the bag. Okay, so deciding what and breaking it in slowly, that's an important piece of this. Again, please don't hesitate to stop me if you have any questions, but I just want to make sure that we're able to move forward as well. Picking the right people, you want to ask yourself, what are the qualifications that the job needs, and who really aligns well with it? And, really important, who's passionate about it? So coming back to this PBS example, I had teachers who had come to me and said, we really think student comportment in our school needs to improve. They were passionate about it. I could see it. They were obvious choices, depending on the teacher, of course, but theoretically, they were obvious choices to at least get them on committee. It made sense because they were passionate about the issue. If they had no interest in it, they may not be the right people. So these are things we have to keep in mind. Self-motivated people, you don't want to sit on top of them all the time. It's not healthy, and frankly, you can't do it. So you want people who you know are motivated, people who you're confident can do it well, and then you want to, as you're getting to know your staff or as you're continuing to know your staff, try to make notes of what are they really good at. Because you might not have something like this for them today, but 6 months from now or a year from now, something might emerge, and then you know who your go-to people are. All right? Now, in that context, sometimes you need to build efficacy. You need to build them up. Right? What do they need to know in order to do this? And how am I going to give them that information? That might be going to a workshop. That might be bringing in a coach. It might be, viewing some videos, doing some homework, reading a book. It could be all sorts of things. But you need to be able to say, here's what I want you to do, and here are some things I think you might want to look at in order to give yourself the tools that you need in order to do it. Because otherwise you're just throwing them out there and asking them to swim. And that's not very fair. People don't want to be put in a compromised position. They don't want to be felt like you just dropped the ball on me and walked away. So we have to be very careful of it. Okay? How are they going to practice it? And this is extremely important. Every outcome you want from somebody has to have a vision of what success looks like. Because if you don't, then we go back to the X and Y example that we gave earlier. Okay? The more detailed that you can be, and we're going to come back to this soon, where you can lay out what does a successful implementation look like? What does great communication look like? And if you want a nice technique, it's a brief sidebar, but it's worthwhile to consider quickly, something called scaling. Scaling is you put it on a scale from 1 to 10. 1 would be, let's say, the worst example. 10 would be the optimal. And where are you today? So where are we in our school in terms of communication? Okay, what would 1 look like? Awful communication, and we talk about frequency, we talk about message, we talk about things like this. And what does a 10 look like? Now that I know what the extremes look like, where do we fit within the continuum? And so now I want you to get us from a 4, which we agree is roughly where we are, how can we get to a 7? And what does that look like? And try to be as detailed as you can so they know what they're trying to achieve. Any questions? Makes sense? Be as clear as you can and try to do it in writing. Right? Email is a wonderful tool at times. It can oftentimes be a negative tool, depends on how it's used. You don't want to use it certainly for the kinds of communications that really deserve face-to-face interaction. But email is nice, or a memo is nice, where you lay out the summary of your conversation. So in our conversation today, we talked about communication. We agreed to the following. And you lay out those timetables in 2 months, in 4 months, in 6 months. This is what we think we're going to do. And we're going to meet. This is also really important. I'm not sure if it's on this slide, but I think it will be somewhere. And it's really important as well. If they know from the outset that you intend to check in, and if not because of trust, it's just because you want to stay informed and you want to be able to help. Right? Nobody minds being helped if they understand that it's coming from a generous heart. People mind being helped if they think it's because it's a reflection on my incapacity. But if you're saying that regardless of the process, I'm going to be there just because it's my job as the head of school to weigh in every now and again to check in on the process, then they'll, I think, take to it a lot better. So being upfront in that regard, I think, can be very helpful and very, it creates the right relationship. Okay? So you obviously have to give them some room. You can't be micromanaging, right? And that's a risk we take. So if you have the right person, you've educated them properly, you've discussed the timetables and the deliverables and what everything's things going to look like, at the end of the day, you're going to have to let go and let the process go. And of course, you check in, as we'll see. You don't want to let it go offline too far. If it does, you have to reel it back in. But you're going to have to trust that they're going to do a fine job. And they're going to bring their own unique qualities. It's not going to look like the way you wanted it to look like, or you would have done it. Usually not. Unless the template is so confined. In most cases, it will have that person's personality and whatnot stamped all over it. But that's okay. Because that's really what bringing the team along is all about. Any questions? Moving right along. Some additional tips to consider. Certainly you want to get buy-in, right? Make sure that they really are willing to do this. Oftentimes I would give them a day or two to consider, right? Now that we've discussed it, you still want to do it, right? Because the first time I mentioned it sounds great. Who doesn't want to improve student behavior? But now that I know what it really entails, it means bringing the team together every week. It means bringing it to the full faculty once every however often. It means communicating it to the parents. It means doing the behind-the-scenes legwork. It's a lot of work. And if you don't have much in the budget, and you're doing this sort of as an add-on, you might feel kind of guilty about it. So minimally, you want to make sure they're really committed to this. They know what they're getting into, and they feel confident and comfortable with it. And then, of course, you give them the authority they need to get it done. And you're behind them. So when somebody comes, another teacher comes and complains, Miss So-and-so is ... unless it's egregious and really inappropriate, you have to be able to give them the support that they need to get the job done. And maybe that means even a title. giving them some kind of additional position within the school, even if it's temporary, for the purpose of seeing this process through. Because when people have a title, they might even have a workspace that's unique for this requirement, that adds credibility to what they're doing. It says we value this to such a degree that we're going to carve out additional authority for this person to get that job done. And that person also feels invigorated and supported that way, right? When we add a title to our LinkedIn profile or whatever it might be, we feel good about it, right? It makes us feel like we're adding to our professional portfolio. Okay? Of course, this is the key we've been talking about. You got to monitor progress. And I think if you're upfront and you say, every other week or every week, on Tuesdays at such and such a time, we'll have a standing meeting in my office. And you'll bring me the updates. And of course, if you have things to share in between, by all means, I'm always available for you. But this way, the expectation from the beginning is that I'm checking in, so that it's not that I'm checking in because I heard such and such rumor, or I'm getting the feeling that we're going off the right pathway. It's not a reflection on concern or negativity. It's simply a reality as part of how the process is going to unfold. Okay? And of course, if you have people who are seasoned, they'll need less of it, but regardless, you have to be there to answer questions, especially if you're the resident expert here, because you have things to share. They're going to need to lean on you. Now, when you need to, you're going to have to correct or redirect. It's just part of the process. Ideally, you want to do that in person whenever possible. And then you want to refine. Maybe go back to the original list, see where the ambiguities were. Right? Where did I make a mistake here? And you can hold the responsibility for yourself. Right? Keep it as much with you as you can, because you want this person to keep going. You don't want to take the wind out of their sails. We have a problem. It's a real problem. We can't just leave it to go, because otherwise we're going to be completely where we don't want to be. And that's a big mistake. But I still have confidence in you. You're my person. You're going to get it done. So how can I step in and help clarify in order to make this process move forward the way that it needs to? Okay? And then I want to give it back to you. So if you communicate that clearly, that person feels you haven't given up hope on them, and hopefully they're going to keep going. Okay? Now, patience is important. Sometimes you want to just jump in on the first error that you see and make a correction. Depending on what it is, you're going to have to make a game time decision. And you're going to have to see, is it really bad? Is it something that I can delicately address without a real meeting? Is it something where I can throw another idea by this person? You have to make those decisions knowing the individual, knowing the project, knowing your relationship. All these things are in your head, and you're the ultimate judge in that regard. But the more that you can do to be patient from the outset, and you know, it's interesting, there's I once heard a talk on what I guess we call domestic bliss or marital satisfaction, things like this. And the person who was speaking talked about having an extra account where you're going to designate an extra $5,000 or $10,000 annually, where if your spouse goes ahead and spends it on things you don't agree with, it just comes out of that account. Sort of like you're not really considering that money part of your daily operations. And this way you don't get worked up about it. Because there are some things that your spouse or a significant other, or whatever it might be, are going to be doing that you don't necessarily agree with. But if you get all worked up and passionate about every single thing you do, then it's going to eat you up and it's going to eat them up. So using that same idea, you sort of give yourself a little bit of wiggle room here, and you say, I know there are going to be some things that I'm not loving, but I'm giving it to that person anyway, and I'm just factoring it into the process. Okay? Now, really important. You want the people who are working for you and doing this, oftentimes voluntarily, to get as much recognition and appreciation as possible. Because that's the energy that keeps them going. It's the breakfast of champions. We know that. And so therefore, anything from a simple card, I found that handwritten cards in particular can be very powerful. Many teachers that I would write a card for at the beginning of the year, whatever it might be, would put it on their corkboards in their classrooms, things like this. They hold on to such things. Feedback is really great. Every now and again, arranging for awards, gifts, maybe a bonus, and possibly just a recognition in the school newsletter. just so that you know, Miss So-and-so has been really working hard to help our school focus in on student behaviors, and we're really appreciative of all the work she's doing. Here are just a couple of things that we've seen over the last few weeks just because of her efforts. One paragraph like that. I bet you she's going to read it, clip it, put it somewhere, or hold on to that for a really long time. Any other message you wrote might go into the trash, but that one she's going to hold on to, and she's going to feel validated by that. Okay? All of us do. It's just the way of the world. Right? If you read Dale Carnegie, you read any of the individuals who are experts in human relations, they talk a lot about fueling people in that regard. Okay? Give credit where credit is due. Oftentimes, credit will come to you. You're the head of school. And ultimately, you are the person signing off on projects. And people will say, oh, Miss So-and-so, look at what her school is doing, and she gets the credit. She has to be able to redirect that credit, not maybe all the time, every day. You get the idea. It's got to be directed to the people who deserve it, okay? And then, another important piece, especially if this is the kind of thing that you want to do again, either for yourself to delegate in the future, or if you want this individual to take on other projects, you got to come back and do some debriefing. Right? What did we learn from this experience? I would say to do it pretty often. Because if you wait to the very end, you're going to lose a lot of the details that occurred along the way. But if you can sort of notate what are some of the challenges that occurred, challenges in peer compliance and acceptance, challenges in how we communicated, challenges in how we set this up from the outset in order to create a successful program. All these things you're learning as you go, because you can have all the ideas, but until you put it into practice, you don't see it. So now, where did we succeed? What went really well? Right? And even if it went really well, will this necessarily translate into success the next time? Or was it the product of some really great circumstances? In that case that I mentioned before, we had teachers that were interested, we had other factors at play. I just learned about it at a principal seminar, so I had books and I had heard a workshop presentation on the topic, so I felt really ready to go. Okay? That might not be true in a different situation. So I have to remind myself, efficacy, knowledge, preparation, passion, all those things, do I have them now that I want to try the next delegation process that I might choose with my team. Okay? So, looking at the clock, we're a little bit over. I apologize. I know we don't have the next one until 9, but I'm going to wrap it up quickly. Did we meet our objectives? We had 3. So question number 1 is, can we explain the importance of delegation? Remember, we talked about burnout. We talked about variety. We talked about, not having all of the responsibility sitting squarely on my shoulders all of the time and being able to move things along faster. Even if you're the best at it, you sometimes just want to get it going, right? It's a great idea, but if it sits with me, it won't see the light of day because I'm just too busy, okay? We talked about when it is or is not appropriate, finding the right people, making sure that they're ready, not asking them to do something that you wouldn't do yourself, that they should feel, of course, you have people that are doing things you wouldn't do. You have your secretarial staff, you have other people in your building. Not everything that you're asking them to do is something that you would do yourself, but I mean at least within your administrative team and those people who you feel are capable of handling big projects, things like this. And finally, can you restate? I'm not going to ask you to because of the time that we have. Many of the strategies we talked about, identifying what to delegate, creating a time frame, creating a sense of what a good outcome is going to look like, educating people as needed in order to make sure that they're the right people and they have the tools that they need, checking in on a regular basis, giving them credit where credit is due, and of course debriefing on the back end to make sure that you know what you learned from this process and how you can carry it forward. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. I hope that the session was valuable, and hopefully everybody will be going back to school ready to delegate, but be patient. Make sure you know you have the right things all lined up and in place, and hopefully this will add another piece to professional practice. Thank you very much. A pleasure to meet all of you.